The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel sparkled with the kind of opulence only New York's elite could muster. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across the marble floors, where hundreds of guests in designer evening wear mingled, their laughter mixing with the soft classical music played by a string quartet in the corner. Zuri Mitchell stood near one of the towering windows, her emerald green gala dress catching the light as she shifted her weight from one foot to another. Despite her rising success in the art world, these high society events still felt foreign to her. She twisted the vintage ring on her finger, a habit she'd developed since inheriting it from her mother 5 years ago. "This ring must have quite a story," said Marcus, her gallery representative and closest friend in the art scene. "You're always playing with it." Zuri held up her hand, letting the ring's intricate design catch the light. The vintage piece featured a unique arrangement of sapphires surrounding a central diamond, set in white gold that had developed a subtle patina over the years. "Mom never told me much about it, actually. She just said it represented a time when she was truly happy. Before she became well-known, before all the complications." "Sounds mysterious," Marcus replied, taking a sip of champagne. "Your mother's early work from that period was incredible. Raw, passionate. Different from her later pieces." From across the room, a tall figure in an impeccably tailored black suit stood alone, nursing a glass of scotch. Evan Harper, despite his billions and business acumen, preferred to observe these social gatherings from a distance. At 45, his dark hair was graying at the temples, adding to his distinguished appearance. He wasn't actively listening to the conversations around him until a particular word combination caught his attention. "The sapphires are unusual," Zuri continued, her voice carrying in a momentary lull in the ambient noise. "Mom said they reminded her of someone's eyes." Evan's hand tightened around his glass. His steel blue eyes, the same shade as the sapphires, fixed on the ring. 20 years of carefully constructed emotional walls threatened to crumble at the sight of it. He found himself moving across the room before he could stop himself. Each step felt heavier than the last as memories he'd buried beneath years of corporate acquisitions and board meetings resurfaced. The ring. Clara's ring. The one he'd given her when they were young and foolish enough to believe love could conquer all. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. Zuri and Marcus turned, startled by his sudden appearance. "That ring." Zuri instinctively covered it with her other hand, a protective gesture. "Yes. May I?" Evan asked, extending his hand. Something in his expression made Zuri slowly offer her hand for inspection. Evan studied the ring, and for a moment, his carefully maintained facade cracked. Pain, love, and regret flickered across his features before he could compose himself. "It's quite beautiful," he managed, releasing her hand. "The craftsmanship is remarkable." "Did you know my mother?" Zuri asked, her artist's eye catching the micro-expressions that betrayed deeper emotions. Evan paused, weighing 20 years of silence against the earnest question in Zuri's eyes, Clara's eyes. "Yes," he finally admitted. "I knew her. A lifetime ago." Marcus, sensing the tension, quietly excused himself, leaving Zuri and Evan in their own bubble amidst the crowded ballroom. "How?" Zuri pressed, her heart racing with the possibility of learning something new about her mother. "When?" Evan looked around the ballroom, suddenly aware of the many ears eager for gossip. "Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private." Evan led Zuri to a secluded terrace overlooking the city lights. The cool evening air provided a sharp contrast to the stuffy atmosphere inside. Away from prying eyes, his shoulders dropped slightly, the weight of his carefully maintained public persona lessening. "Your mother and I met when she was an unknown artist, working out of a tiny studio in Brooklyn," Evan began, his voice carrying a warmth that hadn't been present during their interaction inside. "I was just starting my first company, living on coffee and determination. The ring you're wearing, I gave it to her." Zuri's breath caught. She stared at the ring with new eyes, suddenly understanding why her mother had been so protective of it. "You and my mother were in love," Evan finished simply. "Deeply, completely in love. The kind of love you read about but rarely believe exists." He moved to the terrace railing, looking out at the city skyline. "I found the ring in a small antique shop in Paris. The sapphires matched her favorite color. She used to say they reminded her of the ocean at dawn." "But what happened?" Zuri asked, joining him at the railing. "Mom never mentioned you." She raised me alone, and when she spoke about love, it was always with a kind of sadness. Evan's jaw tightened. Ambition happened. My company was taking off, requiring more and more of my time. Your mother's art was beginning to get noticed. We were both so young, so driven. He paused, running a hand through his hair. I made a choice that I've regretted every day since. A merger opportunity came up in Hong Kong. It would either make or break my company. Clara, your mother, she asked me to stay, to choose us over the business. And you chose the business, Zuri said quietly. I told myself it would just be for a year. That I'd come back, that we'd resume our life together. Evan's laugh was hollow. By the time I returned, she was gone. The ring left behind on our bedroom dresser. No note, no forwarding address. Just, gone. Zuri twisted the ring on her finger, feeling its weight differently now. She never stopped wearing it, you know. Even after she became successful, even after I was born. She only took it off the day she couldn't finish the sentence. I followed her career from afar, Evan admitted. Watched her rise in the art world. Saw her pieces selling at major galleries. I bought several of them through intermediaries. They're in my private collection. He turned to face Zuri. When I saw her obituary 5 years ago, I wanted to reach out to you. But what right did I have? I was just a man who had loved and lost your mother 2 decades ago. I need to know more, Zuri said firmly. There are so many gaps in my understanding of who she was. I have her journals, her letters, but I've never been able to piece together the full story. She met his gaze directly. Will you help me understand? Evan hesitated, old pain warring with the desire to connect with this piece of Clara that stood before him. Are you sure you want to dig into the past? Sometimes old wounds are better left undisturbed. I'm an artist, like my mother, Zuri replied. We don't believe in leaving stories untold. Every painting reveals a truth, even if it's painful. I want to understand her story, and yours. Evan was quiet for a long moment, the sounds of the party drifting out to them from inside. Finally, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a business card. Meet me tomorrow at this address. There's a cafe nearby where we can talk more freely. The cafe was a small, intimate space in the West Village, far removed from the glittering world of last night's gala. Morning light filtered through large windows, casting warm patches on the worn wooden tables. Zuri arrived first, clutching a worn leather folder containing her mother's letters. When Evan walked in, he'd traded his formal suit for a casual blazer and jeans, though his bearing still marked him as someone accustomed to authority. He ordered black coffee and settled into the chair across from Zuri, his eyes immediately drawn to the folder. I found these in Mom's studio after she passed, Zuri explained, carefully opening the folder. Some are addressed to someone called E, but I never made the connection until now. She selected one letter, its paper yellowed with age, and began to read. My dearest E, the city feels empty without you. I paint until my hands shake, trying to capture the feeling of what we had. But how do you paint absence? How do you capture the hollow space where love used to live? They're calling my new series Breakthrough Work, but they don't understand that each canvas is a letter to you, each brushstroke a word I can't say aloud. Evan's hands tightened around his coffee cup. The carefully constructed walls he'd built over 2 decades threatened to crumble at hearing Clara's words. I never knew she wrote to me, he said quietly. When I returned from Hong Kong, I tried to find her. Hired private investigators, searched every art gallery in New York. But she'd vanished completely. She was in Paris, Zuri revealed. That's where I was born. She said she needed to reinvent herself, to find her voice again. She pulled out another letter. This one's dated a year after you left. The Seine at dawn reminds me of your eyes, of that ring you gave me. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, leaving without a word. But seeing you choose your ambitions over us, it broke something in me that I'm still trying to repair. I was a fool, Evan admitted, his usual confidence stripped away. I thought I could have everything, the success, the empire, and the love. By the time I realized what really mattered, it was too late. He reached for one of the letters, then stopped himself. May I? Zuri nodded, watching as he carefully unfolded the delicate paper. His eyes moved across the words, drinking in Clara's handwriting, her thoughts, her pain. Your mother was extraordinary, he said finally. Not just her talent, though that was remarkable, but her soul. She saw the world differently, saw beauty in places everyone else overlooked. He looked up at Zuri. You have that same quality in your work. I've followed your career, you know. Anonymously, of course. Why didn't you ever reach out? Zuri asked, though she thought she knew the answer. Shame, Evan replied simply. Regret. The knowledge that I had chosen poorly and lost something precious. And later, when I heard about you, I felt I had no right to intrude on the life she'd built. Zuri studied him, seeing beyond the powerful businessman to the young man her mother had loved. These letters, they're full of both love and pain. Mom never really moved on, did she? Neither did I, Evan admitted. Oh, I dated, even came close to marriage once. But no one ever. He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. Their investigation led them to Zuri's mother's old studio, a converted industrial space in Brooklyn that had been preserved exactly as she'd left it. Canvases leaned against walls, dried paint tubes littered the tables, and the faint scent of turpentine still lingered in the air. I haven't changed anything, Zuri explained, navigating through the organized chaos. It felt wrong somehow, like disturbing a sacred space. She moved toward a large canvas covered with a drop cloth. But yesterday, after our talk, I remembered something. A painting she never showed anyone. With careful movements, she pulled away the cloth, revealing a portrait that made Evan step back involuntarily. There he was, 20 years younger, captured in oils and emotion. The artist had caught him in a moment of unguarded tenderness, his usual sharp edges softened by love. In the painting, he sat by a window, early morning light casting blue shadows across his face, his eyes fixed on something beyond the frame with an expression of pure adoration. She painted this the morning before you left for Hong Kong, Zuri said softly, watching Evan's reaction. I found her notes about it last night. Evan moved closer to the canvas, his hand hovering near the surface without touching it. I remember that morning, he said, his voice rough. We had breakfast on the fire escape. She was wearing my shirt, hair all messy from sleep. I told her about the Hong Kong deal, convinced her it would be our stepping stone to everything we dreamed of. The way she captured you. Zuri observed, her artist's eye taking in the technical brilliance of the piece. There's so much love here, but also, she knew, didn't she? She knew you were slipping away. Your mother always saw more than she let on, Evan replied, finally stepping back from the painting. It was one of the things that made her work so powerful. She could capture the truth beneath the surface. Moving through the studio, Zuri began opening drawers and cabinets. She kept everything. Every sketch, every study. She pulled out a portfolio filled with preliminary drawings. Look at these. They're all of you. Evan took the portfolio with trembling hands. Page after page of sketches, him working at his desk, sleeping, laughing, lost in thought. Each drawing captured a different facet of their life together, moments he'd forced himself to forget. I can't do this, he said suddenly, trying to hand the portfolio back to Zuri. These memories. I've spent 20 years building a life that doesn't include them. But Zuri refused to take the drawings. Running away didn't work for either of you the first time, she said firmly. Mom spent the rest of her life putting her pain into her art. You built an empire but lost your heart. Maybe it's time to stop running. She moved to another part of the studio and opened a large flat file drawer. There's more. Mom's gallery is planning a retrospective of her work. They've asked me to curate it. She pulled out several exhibition catalogs from her mother's past shows. I want to include these pieces, Evan. The ones that tell the truth about her journey, including her love for you. Zuri, Evan protested, my private life, my company's public image. Is that really what you're worried about? Zuri challenged. Or are you afraid of letting the world see who you really are? The man in these paintings, the one my mother loved. The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Evan looked around the studio, at the evidence of a love story captured in paint and pencil, at the daughter who carried her mother's artistic vision and unflinching honesty. They ended up sitting on the studio's worn leather couch, surrounded by the physical remnants of Clara's life. The afternoon light slanted through the industrial windows, creating long shadows across the floor. Evan had loosened his tie, his corporate armor slowly falling away in this space that held so many memories. "I built my entire life around being in control," Evan admitted, breaking a long silence. "Every decision calculated, every risk measured. The board, the shareholders, they trust me because I never let emotion cloud my judgment." He gave a bitter laugh. "At least, that's what they think." Zuri leaned forward, her elbows on her knees. "And what's the reality?" "The reality?" Evan stood, pacing the studio floor. "The reality is that every major acquisition, every corporate victory, was fueled by trying to fill a void. I threw myself into building an empire because it was easier than admitting I'd lost the only thing that really mattered. And now?" Zuri pressed. "What are you afraid of losing now?" The question stopped him in his tracks. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Zuri saw complete vulnerability in his expression. "My carefully constructed facade. The story I've told myself for 20 years. If these paintings are shown, if people see." He gestured to the portrait. "That man. The one your mother saw. I'm not sure I know how to be him anymore." Zuri stood and walked to her own workspace in the corner of the studio. "You want to know something? I've spent my entire career trying to live up to her legacy. Every brushstroke, every exhibition, I feel her shadow. The pressure to be perfect, to be worthy of being Clara Mitchell's daughter." She picked up one of her own unfinished canvases. "But lately, I've realized something. The power of her work wasn't in its perfection. It was in its honesty. She painted truth, even when it hurt." Their eyes met across the studio. "Maybe that's what we're both afraid of. Being truly seen." The moment stretched between them, charged with understanding. Evan moved closer, looking at Zuri's painting. "You have her gift," he said softly. "Not just the talent, but the courage to show what's real." Without thinking, Zuri reached out and touched his hand. The contact was brief but electric, carrying echoes of another love story, another time. They both pulled back quickly, startled by the intensity of the connection. "I'm sorry," they said simultaneously, then shared an awkward laugh. "This is complicated," Evan said, running a hand through his hair. "You're her daughter. I'm the man she never stopped loving," Zuri finished. "The men whose eyes I've been painting without realizing it." She gestured to her recent works, where deep blues dominated the canvases. "I always wondered why I was drawn to that particular shade." They moved apart, each retreating to safer emotional distance. The studio felt suddenly smaller, more intimate than either was prepared for. "Perhaps we should take a break," Evan suggested, his business persona trying to reassert itself. "This is a lot to process." In the days that followed, Zuri immersed herself in her mother's journals, seeking understanding in the leather-bound pages. She sat cross-legged on the studio floor, surrounded by volumes of Clara's private thoughts. Evan had kept his distance since their charged moment, but had agreed to meet her again to discuss what she found. April 15th, Zuri read aloud when Evan arrived. "Today I saw a young couple on the street, so in love they were oblivious to everything around them. I wanted to tell them to hold on tight, to choose love over ambition, dreams over deals. But who am I to give advice? I ran away when it got too hard. I chose pride over fighting for what we had." Evan stood by the window, his silhouette dark against the afternoon light. "She blamed herself," he said quietly. "All these years, I thought she left because she was angry with me." Zuri turned to another page. "I keep the ring because it reminds me that true love exists. That it's possible to feel so deeply for another person that the whole world shifts on its axis." Zuri asks about her father sometimes. "How do I tell her that love isn't always enough? That sometimes two people can love each other completely and still lose their way?" "She never told you about me?" Evan asked, though he knew the answer. "She told me my father was someone she loved very much, who had to go away," Zuri replied. "As I got older, I stopped asking. I could see how much it hurt her to talk about it." She closed the journal carefully. "But she wrote about you constantly. Listen to this, I see him in the financial pages sometimes. Each new success, each achievement, I want to call and tell him I'm proud of him. Isn't that strange? To be proud of someone who broke your heart." Evan moved away from the window, picking up one of the journals. "May I?" Zuri nodded, watching as he opened to a random page and began to read silently. His expression changed as he absorbed Clara's words, decades of misunderstanding beginning to unravel. "She writes about an exhibition she wanted to do," he said finally. "One that would tell our story through her art. But she was afraid it would hurt too many people." "That's the exhibition I want to create now," Zuri said firmly. "Not just a retrospective of her work, but a revelation of the woman behind it. The love, the pain, the choices, all of it." "Zuri." Evan's voice held warning. "The implications." "I know what I'm asking," she interrupted. "To see your past, to make public what you've kept private for so long. But Mom's journals show that she never wanted your story to end in silence. She wanted truth." She stood, moving to the wall where she'd begun arranging photographs and sketches for the exhibition. "Look at these pieces together. They tell a story of two people who loved deeply but were afraid to fight for that love. Don't you think that's worth sharing?" Evan studied the wall, seeing their history laid out in images and words. "Your mother always said that art should serve truth above all else," he said slowly. "That real beauty lies in honesty, not perfection." "Help me tell her story," Zuri pleaded. "Our story. All of it." The next meeting found them in Evan's penthouse office, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. The space was meticulously designed, all chrome and glass, lacking the warm chaos of Clara's studio. Zuri noticed there wasn't a single piece of art on the walls, despite Evan's admission of collecting her mother's work. "The paintings are in my private quarters," he explained, noting her observation. "I couldn't bear to have them here, where I conduct business. It felt wrong somehow. Like keeping your heart separate from your work." Zuri challenged. "Isn't that exactly what drove you apart in the first place?" The directness of her question made Evan flinch. He moved to a concealed door, entering a code on a keypad. "Come with me." The private gallery beyond the door was a stark contrast to his office. Warm lighting illuminated dozens of Clara's paintings, arranged chronologically. Zuri gasped, recognizing major works from throughout her mother's career. "You really did collect them all," she whispered. "Every piece I could find," Evan confirmed. "Through intermediaries, private auctions, galleries. I told myself it was investment in fine art, but..." He gestured to the carefully curated collection. "This room is where I come when the weight of being Evan Harper, CEO, becomes too heavy." "You've been hiding," Zuri said bluntly. "Behind your success, your wealth, these walls. Just like I've been hiding behind my mother's reputation." "It's safer that way," Evan replied defensively. "Is it?" Zuri stepped closer, her expression fierce. "Look where playing it safe got you and Mom. 20 years of regret. A love story left unfinished. Are you really going to let fear win again? You don't understand the pressures." "No, you don't understand," Zuri interrupted. "I've spent the last week reading every word my mother wrote about you. She didn't want you to be safe. She wanted you to be real. To be the man who gave her a sapphire ring and promised her the world. That man was young and foolish. That man was brave enough to love completely," Zuri countered. "What happened to him, Evan? When did you decide that success was worth more than being truly alive?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and truth. Evan moved to stand before one of Clara's later works, a dark, swirling canvas of blues and grays. "I see him sometimes," he admitted quietly. "In meetings, I'll catch myself thinking about what Clara would say about the corporate games we play. At charity galas, I remember dancing with her in our tiny apartment." He turned to face Zuri. "But letting him out, letting people see that side of me, it's terrifying. More terrifying than spending the rest of your life behind these walls." Zuri gestured to the gallery. "Living with ghosts and regrets." As they worked on the exhibition preparations, Zuri spent hours organizing her mother's works chronologically. One afternoon, while moving paintings in the storage room, she discovered a canvas wrapped in heavy brown paper, tucked behind others. The note attached simply read, 4E, never shown. Her hands trembled as she carefully unwrapped it. The painting that emerged took her breath away. It showed Evan sleeping, but it was unlike any other portrait she'd seen. The technique was almost magical. Layers of translucent colors revealed not just his physical form, but seemed to capture his dreams. His sleeping figure was surrounded by swirling symbols of ambition and love, soaring skyscrapers intertwined with blooming roses, dollar signs dissolving into heart shapes, all rendered in those signature blues her mother loved. When Evan arrived at the studio later that day, Zuri had already placed the painting on an easel in the center of the room. She watched his face as he saw it for the first time, noting how all color drained from his expression. "I remember that morning," he said hoarsely. "It was the day before the Hong Kong deal. I'd fallen asleep on the couch in her studio while she worked. I thought she was painting the cityscape." "She was painting your soul," Zuri said quietly. "Look at the details, the conflict between love and ambition, the way the buildings both rise and crumble. She saw everything you were struggling with, even then." Evan moved closer to the canvas, his hand reaching out but not quite touching the surface. "The title," he noted, reading the small plate attached to the frame. "Dreams of a Man Divided." "Mom wrote about this piece in her journal," Zuri said, retrieving the relevant volume. "I watched him sleep today, his face so peaceful, belying the war within him. I painted what I saw beneath the surface, a man torn between two loves. His dreams are full of towers reaching to the sky, but his heart bleeds roses. Which will win, I wonder? The architect of empires or the boy who kisses me like I'm made of starlight?" The tension in the room grew thick as they both absorbed the impact of Clara's words. Evan's professional facade cracked further, revealing raw emotion beneath. "Your feelings for me," he said suddenly, turning to face Zuri. "They're becoming complicated, aren't they?" Zuri stepped back, startled by his directness. I see it in the way you look at me sometimes," he continued. "The way you touch my hand when showing me your mother's work. It's not just about the exhibition anymore, is it?" "No," Zuri admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's impossible. Because of Clara. Because of everything." Zuri moved away, creating physical distance. "You loved my mother. You're the great love story of her life. And I'm the living reminder of what we lost," Evan finished. "Of what might have been." They stood in silence, the newly discovered painting between them like a bridge and a barrier all at once. The swirling blues of the artwork seemed to pulse with their unspoken emotions. The exhibition opening night transformed the gallery into a journey through love and loss. Zuri had arranged the paintings chronologically, creating a narrative that began with hope and passion, moved through separation and pain, and ended with a kind of bittersweet acceptance. The newly discovered Dreams of a Man Divided occupied a central position, its swirling blues drawing every eye. The crowd was a mix of art world elite and corporate power players, many of whom were there to see why the notoriously private Evan Harper had attached his name to the show. He stood near the entrance, impeccable in a black suit, greeting guests with practiced ease while avoiding looking too long at any single painting. Zuri moved through the space in a midnight blue gown that echoed the colors in her mother's work. She'd chosen it deliberately, a silent homage to the signature shade that had defined Clara's most powerful pieces. As she approached each group of visitors, she heard fragments of their conversations. The emotion in these pieces. "Did you know Harper was her patron? Look at the dates, this was when he was building his first company." The air felt electric with revealed secrets. Every painting told part of the story, the early pieces full of joy and possibility, the later ones heavy with longing and regret. Zuri had included excerpts from her mother's journals, carefully selected to complement each phase of the artwork. Near the Dreams of a Man Divided, she'd posted Clara's words, "Love doesn't die. It transforms. Sometimes into art, sometimes into memory, sometimes into the quiet spaces between heartbeats where we keep our deepest truths." As the evening progressed, Zuri noticed Evan growing increasingly tense. He kept glancing at the central painting, his composed expression slipping whenever he thought no one was watching. Finally, she saw him slip away from the crowd, heading toward a small private viewing room she'd set up as a quiet space. She found him there, standing before a small sketch she'd included at the last minute, a simple drawing of his hands holding the sapphire ring. "I can't do this," he said without turning around. "Seeing our story laid bare like this, seeing you in that dress that's the exact color of your eyes," Zuri finished. "Of the sapphires in the ring. Of every important painting she ever made." He turned to face her then, and the look in his eyes made her heart stop. "You're so much like her. The way you see through pretense, the way you demand truth. Evan. No, he cut her off. We need to face this. The attraction between us, it's not just about who we are. It's about ghosts and regrets and trying to rewrite the past. Zuri stepped closer, close enough to see the subtle tremor in his hands. Is that all it is? The air between them crackled with tension. For a moment, it seemed he might reach for her, might try to answer the question that had been building between them for weeks. Instead, he took a deliberate step back. Your mother once told me that the hardest part of being an artist is knowing when to stop, when to let a piece be finished, he said quietly. Maybe some stories need to stay unfinished. The revelation came like a thunderclap in the quiet aftermath of the exhibition. Most guests had departed, leaving only a few stragglers admiring the artwork, when an elegant woman in her 70s approached Zuri. Her silver hair was swept into a chic updo, and she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had seen much of life's beauty and pain. You've captured her spirit beautifully, the woman said, gesturing to the exhibition. Clara would be proud. Zuri turned, ready to offer polite thanks, when something in the woman's expression made her pause. You knew my mother. I was her closest friend in Paris, the woman replied. I'm Marie Dubois. I was there when she made the decision not to return to New York. She glanced meaningfully at Evan, who had drawn closer upon hearing her introduction. And I was there the day she decided to come back. The quiet authority in her voice drew them both to a secluded corner of the gallery. What do you mean, come back? Evan asked, his voice rough with tension. Marie's eyes filled with tears. Clara had finally decided to find you, Evan. She'd seen news of your philanthropy work, your environmental initiatives. She said she could see the boy she loved in the man you'd become. She reached into her purse and withdrew an envelope, yellowed with age. She wrote this letter the day before the accident. She was going to mail it, but never got the chance. Zuri's hands shook as she took the envelope. Inside was a single page, covered in her mother's distinctive handwriting. My dearest E. 20 years is too long to hold on to pride. Too long to pretend that success fills the spaces where love should live. I see you in the news, building hospitals, funding art programs, creating change in the world, and I recognize the man I always knew you could be, one who found a way to merge ambition with heart. I'm coming home, if you'll have me. If you'll have us. There's so much to tell you, so much you need to know about the beautiful life that grew from our love. The letter ended there, unfinished. Evan had gone completely still, his face a mask of pain and revelation. She was coming back, he whispered. All this time, I thought. The accident happened the next morning, Marie said gently. She was on her way to post this letter when. She couldn't finish the sentence. Zuri felt her world tilting on its axis. She was ready to tell him everything. About me, about why she left. Your mother believed in second chances, Marie continued, looking between them. She understood that love sometimes needs time to grow into its truest form. Her gaze lingered on how close Zuri and Evan stood, the unconscious mirroring in their postures. She would want you both to find happiness, even if it's not in the way any of us expected. The truth of her words hung in the air, heavy with possibility. Evan turned to Zuri, seeing her through new eyes, not as a ghost of past love, but as someone who, like him, had been shaped by love's absence and its endurance. What do we do now? Zuri asked, her voice barely a whisper. Evan reached for her hand, then hesitated. We honor your mother's belief in second chances, he said finally. Not by trying to recreate the past, but by being brave enough to write our own story. As they stood there, surrounded by Clara's art, her last unfinished letter between them, they understood that some love stories don't end, they transform, evolve, and find new ways to bloom in unexpected gardens of the heart. Marie smiled softly, seeing the change in them both. Clara always said that the most beautiful art comes from truth. Perhaps this is the masterpiece she was creating all along, a love story that transcends time, pride, and even death itself. The exhibition lights dimmed automatically, leaving them in the gentle glow of evening. Through the gallery windows, the city sparkled like a canvas of stars, promising new beginnings in the very place where their story had begun.